Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Adults Table. My name is Ryan, and once upon a time, I was deep in the world of fundamentalism.
And I'm Rabbi Michael Harvey here at the Adults Table. Our mission is to decode and demystify ancient literature, making the old tales not just accessible, but relatable.
And last week, we took you on a journey wading through the floodwaters of myth and history.
And with each episode, we're equipping ourselves with the tools in our toolbox to better understand ancient narratives.
Right, you are. And this week, we're exploring parallels between the Ugaritic texts, the Canaanite pantheon, and the familiar stories from the Bible.
So, who exactly are these celestial characters or these divine dudes, as we've called them?
I'm
So thanks
definitely
for joining
intrigued.
us. Yeah, thanks for joining us for our fourth episode. And we really do appreciate you hanging with us. Stick with us. This is going to be a great show.
All right.
The Adults Table. Theological conversations, uncensored.
Can you believe that? 4 whole episodes. Whoop, whoop.
I know we made it.
We did it. I am super excited for tonight's show, but did you have a good
Yeah,
weekend? Everything going all right?
everything is great. I've got my kiddos this weekend, including my son who's with me tonight, sitting next to me, who's going to join with me for all of you. And super excited to talk about this, especially some of the Israelite mythology and pantheon aspects, because it's some of my favorite stuff. But the truth is, tonight Ryan's taken the lead because this is some stuff that she's dug into from even more of an archaeological point of view, and so I think I'm going to be the one who's going to be learning things to add to my repertoire tonight. But this is something we're both passionate about.
If you say so, Rabbi Mike. No, I really do appreciate that, and that's what I'm hoping, because as I'm going through this, I am starting, little things are starting to click as I go, and I really do hope that I can bring people with us. So what I'm hoping to achieve tonight is discuss these divine dudes, as you said, and I would say that these dudes actually are some goddesses. So we've got gods, we've got goddesses. Now, this is going back into the ancient Canaanite pantheon. Now, evidence for them is very scarce in the Bible. So tonight we're just going to be focusing on sons of God. So I think what I need to do, maybe for the first time, is I need to put that info on the table. What do you think?
I think let's put it on the table.
All right,
Yeah.
we're going to give it a shot this time. Let's put it on the
Okay.
table.
Let's put it on.
Look at that.
And
Beautiful.
it's on the table. It's on the
It's
table.
on
So
just like
um,
that.
just like that. So, what I want to set the stage for you guys is that what we're talking about here is we're going to demystify the idea that Israelite religion was always monotheistic, and rather look at the more scholarly view and archaeological view to show that it, like all the other cultures of the time, was polytheistic and had its own, as Ryan will explain, the pantheon, and some of that did bleed over into our Bible, but has been decoded or translated, or interpreted for you in a way that removes those amazing ancient Near East connections, which is such a shame. So the Bene Elohim, which we'll be talking about tonight, we're talking about this group of Elohim, of gods. This is before the monotheistic ideas of that Elohim represents a plurality of one God. That's obviously an interpretation. And then I think this is where I'm going to sit back and learn a little bit about the Ugaritic and the Canaanite texts and that whole dichotomy and hierarchy of their pantheon which Israelite religion at the time and Yahwehism took with them on their way. So I'm super excited for all of you, and I'm super excited to hear it.
Right. It's a very natural process, syncretism. It happens out of necessity, out of, war, tribulation, who knows exactly the reasons, but it does happen. And hopefully we can kind of walk through Canaan a little bit and a little bit into Egypt. I was hoping to get into Mesopotamia, but sorry, there's just too much, Charlie, too much on the table. I can't put all that
Yeah,
on the table in an
it's
hour.
true.
It's too much. So I have this little map for you just to show you where we're going to be. And we're going to ask ourselves the question, who or what are these sons of God, the Bene Elohim? And when I was doing my research, just to get as much information as I could, if you just search who are the sons of God or Bene Elohim in YouTube, like what you're going to get is a toss up. And it's going to be a range of giants, the Nephilim, Rephaim. You do get some who say it's directly like a son of God, other gods, divine beings,
Right.
angels, humans. I've even heard people say wooden idols. So that's a wide variety of ideas of what these are. So I'm hoping that we can narrow it down and give a little bit more evidence. These are divine beings. These are children of, well, who I guess we should say, who are these? Who's their
Right.
daddy? Who
And
is
that's why a
your
lot of
who's
these,
your daddy?
right. Good Lord. That's why teaching sessions like this, right? What Ryan and I will be doing tonight is just offering suggestions to you. We're going to suggest to you these theories and for you to do whatever you want, as always, right? Because there are going to be those that disagree with this. There's going to be those who
100%.
have gone into great depths or whatever it is. Take the information that you're going to have tonight and put it to whatever you've learned before and see what happens. But we're not here to, as always, we want to remind you, we're not here to pull you out of anything or convince you. We're just here to present this great information because we're fascinated with it. So take it as just let's learn about it and go from there.
I love that you said that because I have a lot of people who follow me who are still religious, who still, believe these gods exist, who still think these gods come to them or whatever. And I'm not here to go like, well, that's not true. Hey, whatever. If I gave you some information that makes you feel more comfortable in your practice, so be it. I'm okay with that. I'm just here to give information as you are. Okay, so this is, as you can see, the Qumran caves. This is where a lot of scrolls were found just recently, and I'm going to keep it moving just because I've got a couple of these. All right, that's just an idea so you can see the terrain of where these scrolls were hidden. They must have been going through something wild to go and do this. And thank goodness they did, because they've just given us an idea of what was happening in the religious landscape at that time, which, was a little bit iffy. So that's awesome. And then here's Masada. We have a scroll that I'm going to show that was found there. This was wasn't this one of the last holdouts before the Roman
It
Legion?
was. And you were saying like they were going through some stuff. This is what they were going through. They were not only did the Roman Legion destroy the temple and do all kinds of stuff up in Jerusalem, but they went all the way down to Qumran, to the Qumranites or Essenes or whoever was there. And so what we're pulling out here isn't it's not texts from 70 CE. They have hidden their library that they held for centuries, maybe longer, and we're pulling out this Geniza, this library of ancient texts that were hidden because Rome's legion was going down. And yes, Masada was the final holdout. So what we're seeing is what's left of these libraries. And libraries, as you know, contain multiple theologies, multiple theories, and And so it opened up an entire new world.
It did. It's amazing. As you're saying that, not even going to lie, I'm probably going to get chills a couple times tonight, because these are gems that we had no idea existed until recently, and is really not only changing our idea of their landscape, but hopefully it'll start to push our landscape a bit further so we can explore and open our minds a little bit. Okay, so let's keep it moving, Ryan. Keep it moving. All right. We have a lot to get through. So the first one that we're going to take a look at is 4Q37. I love this scripture, but you're going to notice that there's some differences in the text here. So Elion. Who is Elion? Well, that is the Most High God. This is El. He is the father of the Canaanite pantheon. He has his consort Asherah. We've talked about this before. I don't want to get too deep into that because I feel like we've covered it and we kind of have more that we need to discuss. And I also have some other slides, of course, with El. But here you can see in 8 and 9, they are being differentiated. El is here sitting at the head of this pantheon, and the Lord, which is, oh, you little jerk. I didn't know it was going to do that if I clicked it. Well, now I know that Lord Yahweh, he's receiving his portion. So he is subordinate to this high God, to this Father God, El. But if you take notice in some of these translations, which I know you know because this is what you do, but there's a huge difference specifically when we get to, is it children, the number of gods? Did El portion everything out according to the number of gods, or to the number of children of Israel?
Right.
Well,
and what we're talking about here is, what we're talking about here is scribal change, not scribal error probably, but scribal change, meaning that a monotheistic school of thought saw this and was like, this isn't going to work. We need to reinterpret it. And the truth is, two things that I definitely want to highlight. What we're looking at here is two versions of Deuteronomy. Well, many versions, as Ryan has let out, but in the Hebrew, Elyon is translated as Most High, but it is capitalized because it is a proper pronoun. The Lord here is the Tetragrammaton, or Yahweh. And so one of the main things that the monotheist school did, was to turn these proper nouns, proper names, into metaphors. And so you'll see like God for Elohim, the Lord for Yahweh, Most High for Elyon. But these are names. And once we saw this line here, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of gods. Once we saw that, we recognized that that word, the number of gods, Bene Elohim, differed from the Masoretic text, which was Bene Yisrael, the children of Israel. And the truth is, if it's Bene Yisrael, it makes no sense, because they're like, we don't know what that means and why there's two references to different names of God. The monotheists will argue all kinds of stuff, but the truth is, if you remove those glasses, and as Ryan has done, you can see when you move from Hebrew into English, it gets even worse.
It's confusing.
Yes.
To
it's
be
very
fair.
Confusing.
It is, especially when you consider if Yahweh is assimilating El's character, then you have a God who's subordinate to himself. He's portioning things out to himself, that it doesn't make sense in the translation. So that's why I thought it was important to highlight. This is El. He's at the top of the pantheon. Yahweh is receiving his portion. It's quite clear. And thankfully, with this discovery, we can see, as you said, those changes.
Right.
So amazing. All right,
a number of gods means multiple gods, which is a name for a pantheon. So that's the whole point of is when that pops out, we're like, pantheon, great.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so you can start to recognize it. And I have some more that will
Yeah.
also kind of bring it to the forefront. So it'll just be easier and easier to see these same things pop up, these motifs, I guess you could say, or whatnot.
Hmm.
So for Q44, this one is interesting because there's the whole two lines that got removed. So sometimes it's just
Yep.
as simple as going like, all right, I don't even know what to do with this. I don't know
Yeah.
if I can change a couple words to make this right, couple letters.
Hmm.
Erase, 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 erase. So as you can see, it says now this one, the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition, thankfully, does reflect what this scroll reflects.
Right.
But some of those other translations, you can see there's two lines completely moved. So
Yeah.
praise all you, oh you, praise, O heavens, his people, worship him, all you gods, for he will avenge the blood of his children and take vengeance on his adversaries. He will repay those who hate him and cleanse the land for his people. So
So cool.
they yoinked out worship him, all you gods.
Right.
For whatever reason, that seemed to upset them.
Can't
And
imagine why. Yeah.
and he will repay those who hate him. And I guess because it's the way the poetry, I watched Dr. Kip Davis. He
Hmm.
explained this so great. He's amazing. Um, he explained this, but they had to take that line out because otherwise it wouldn't have made sense with, so they had to take them both.
Right. The coupling in terms of how biblical poetry does. And there's all kinds of,
Right.
Robert
Thank
Alter
you.
does a whole thing on biblical poetry of like A, B, C, C, A, B, or whatever it is. And so that makes sense that once they made that, they removed that line to keep the pattern of biblical poetry and have it not be like seen as, whoa, something's definitely missing here. They removed that line, but too bad we found it anyway. So,
Ha ha.
uh-huh. Yeah,
Ha ha. You couldn't hide it for too long. Well, I mean, you hid it
right,
for quite a long time. All
right.
right. Moving along, unless there was anything you wanted to bring else to
Just
share.
one thing I just want to
Sure.
emphasize what you're saying here. Take a look at those first three lines. Praise, O heaven, his people, worship him, all you gods, for he will avenge the blood of his children. The subject changes in terms of the blood of his children. If you remove worship him, all you gods, his children changes to the children of his people, not the children of the
Oh.
God. So
Oh.
they have completely changed the subject and the object by removing that. And so you
Interesting
think
point. Yeah.
his blood of his children refers to people, humans. But with
Mm,
this line in it, now we know that the original subject was the pantheon, the gods, and
thank
avenge the
you.
blood of his children, meaning El's children. And we know from Psalm 82 and from Near Eastern legends that yes, the gods could die, and they could be avenged and
Absolutely.
all this sort of stuff. So it changes it completely. What um, El is basically, or Yahweh is attempting to have the people do, when you remove those lines, um, and changes his personality, changes like the
Wow.
the whole
Yeah.
thing. So these changes have huge implications. Talk about the Jenga tower, right? Is if you
Magnificent.
put that in, you pull that out, the whole thing topples. Deuteronomy 32:43, the whole thing topples over. So nice work,
Mm,
nice work.
that's thank you for pointing that out to me. I love
Sure.
that. That makes
Yeah.
it even more like how did people not okay.
Right.
Anyhow, I'm just gonna
All right.
keep it
You
moving.
got lots of stuff. I'm gonna keep going. Yeah.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So who is who's the head honcho? Well, it's Elohim. And this to me really drives it home. Like there's almost no getting around it that this is
Right.
the one he's the guy who controls everything. So Elohim, so we see Elohim twice just in the first verse. We see Elohim, God, he himself, this is singular, has taken place in the divine council. And also, I want you to take note that there's this divine council, this holy court, again, this royal idea in your head of this God surrounded by the his helpers, basically his children, his helpers. So he is in the midst of the gods. He's in the midst of the Elohim. He holds judgment, and the Elohim there is plural. So he's kind of asking, like, why are you going to be so mean? Why are you doing all these bad things? Like, you can't keep this up. And then in verse 6, he says, you are gods, children of the Most High, all of you, Elion, children of El. Nevertheless, you shall die like mortals and fall like any prince. And that is the kind of thing that would give me chills, just thinking of a God up there on his throne, like, I see what you're doing. We're gonna handle business. And people, when they try to say like that this is El talking to humans or El talking to an idol, it doesn't even make sense that El would be in a courtroom with pieces of the pieces of wood are sat there and in the courtroom, just like that. It doesn't make sense for humans to be there. This is God. These are gods who are doing some bad stuff in his point of view, in his purview.
It's one of my favorite Psalms of all time because it is such an interesting theory as to how we got to monotheism, is that Elohim or El murdered the rest of the gods. And now there's just one. I mean, that's an awesome way to explain it. Instead of having to go and erase all, you could just say, yeah, there were lots of them, but our guy took care of the rest of them. And now there's just one. One thing I want to mention really quick on this, because it's my favorite psalm and I just can't help it.
Please do. Tell me,
verse
teach me,
1.
learn me.
Okay. Verse 1. The English sort of screws it up. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. But here's what it is in Hebrew. Elohim, nitzah ba'ad El, b'kerev Elohim yispat. In other words, it uses two big things. The word for God and the word for gods is exactly the same. Elohim has taken his place, and then in the midst of Elohim, he holds judgment. So in other words, what someone's trying to do here is, one of these is a scribal change, because in the midst of the Elohim makes sense because Elohim is plural.
Can't be in the midst of
Elohim.
One. I mean,
correct.
It doesn't make sense.
Correct. It doesn't make sense grammatically, even in Hebrew, right? But the first Elohim is probably a change because it doesn't make any sense that the gods have taken his place. It doesn't make any sense. It was probably Yahweh at a certain point has taken his place in the divine council. And by the way, divine council is ba'adat El, meaning the council of El. So Yahweh has taken his place in the council of El. In the midst of the other gods, he holds judgment. Now that is a cool scene. Yahweh, who is the son of El, takes his place in the council built by his father, El. And in the midst of the gods, he's the one who's going to hold judgment. And he says, I say to you, you are gods, you are Elohim, children of El, just like me.
Right.
But you're going to die. And I'm not.
You're going to die.
You're going to die.
You're going to die.
You're done. You're done. You're done. You're done.
You're done. Okay, I can keep saying that.
Right.
No, but that really is amazing to think of that, and that's similar language that we see in Ugaritic poetry with
exactly, and that's where we get this from. We're not pulling this out of nowhere. It's not made in a vacuum. We have ancient Near Eastern poems that are exactly like this, speaking about gods taking their place in these councils. Killing other gods and taking judge, and so if you look at the last line, right, it says, Kuma Elohim, rise up Elohim. Now, is that Elohim a scribal error as well? Because they were like, well, we can't have one without the other, because they're not taking the side of the other gods. So it's not rise up, you gods, judge the earth. Whoever the first subject is there, the first word of line 1 is also the subject of line 8. Rise up, O, probably Yahweh, judge the earth, for the nations belong to you. But for some reason, they sort of messed with it. So this could have been scribal error. It could have been scribal insertion, but alone, um, Elohim tzibah adat el b'kerev Elohim yispat makes no sense to use the same word twice. And so that to us is a signal saying something was changed and for a
Something was
reason.
changed because
Right.
it is kind of weird to have Elohim and Elohim in one
Right.
verse.
One Elohim
And
means singular and one Elohim means plural.
the only
That's
reason I
not
could figure it out is because I had to look in the Hebrew and I had to hover over the damn word to figure out that it told me that it was, plural or it was
right.
I'm
But
not going to know
if you're not looking at the
I'm just
Hebrew,
looking at what the English right, I'm just looking at what the English
look
gives
at how
me.
the
That's all I
translator
have.
has look at how the translator has answered this for you without you even asking the question. Right.
Basically.
And that's a no-no of that's why you have to have
You don't do
multiple
that.
translations and a teacher to tell you these things. Otherwise, you're going to miss it all, and your interpretation gets built up on an English translation, which is an agenda to follow a particular
Well, look how much you
theological
taught
view.
me. Look how much you
Right.
just taught me
Look how
in about that
just by
subject at the
knowing
beginning.
Hebrew,
Yeah,
you poke holes in it like crazy. And so that's
I love
why
that.
it's so important
Poke,
that you're not reading the Greek, you're
poke.
not reading the English. When you read the Hebrew, poke, 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 and the tower just and sorry, sorry, not sorry. But
Not
yeah,
sorry. Okay,
yeah.
let's
Okay.
keep it pressing. So I thought I would bring up a couple scriptures that have these different versions of
Brad.
these sons of God. So in Genesis 6, we talked about that. We'll probably get into that a little bit towards the end. The sons of God are these Bene Elohim, are these hot and bothered angels, some people say,
Mm,
gods, whatever, that come down to earth. And I've been told they turn into demons when they come down to earth. And, we're hot and sexy and they mate with us and we pop out giant babies. Uh, and
obviously, yeah.
yeah, that's just kind of like a little mishmash of a couple stories tied together and to, give us a narrative that to make something simple. So they don't have to explain away all these gods, right? They can just write a little story, a little ditty, tie it up in a bow, and it's good to go. Job
Right.
1. I love this one. I love
Yeah.
the B'nai Elohim in here simply because Satan is amongst these divine beings.
Right.
And that just like blew my mind completely to think that, wait, Satan is a god? Why is Satan standing before Yahweh? Why
Right.
does he seem to be, why does he have this relationship with Yahweh like he does?
Right.
The way they're talking to each other,
Right.
kind of hot.
Yeah, they've dealt with stuff before. And so one, one thing that you need to do when looking at these is pull all of that stuff that has been pushed on you and throw it away. Angels, demons, who Satan is, all that has been interpreted later and then imposed on it. Okay, there's no angels in certain aspects of Genesis. They're talking about um, other gods. Ha-Satan, meaning the accuser or the prosecuting attorney, is a servant of God who can only do what God commands, stay within those boundaries. So, is that a god or is that a worker angel or someone who was appointed to do something? But he is not the Lucifer, Morning Star, or whatever it is. Satan.
No,
That's totally different.
no.
We're talking about this is just as we saw Azazel in Leviticus. This is the first appearance of another divine being who seems to be buddy buddy with Yahweh.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's fascinating to think of God because we were told this didn't happen, but God having God helpers to do things for me,
Right.
just as
That's
El
right.
had his children who would do things for him, or his sons would do things for each other. They would work in tandem, what have you.
Mhm.
Um, moving on to Psalm 29. So this is B'nai Elim, still plural.
Mhm.
And And also, again, depending on your translation, this was another thing that made it a little confusing is sometimes they use heavenly beings, as in this translation. And they did the same in Job
Such nonsense.
1. Right. But and then sometimes they'll call them divine counsel. But
Right.
I'm trying to point out that this is, again, meaning what you're saying. These are gods who are just sons of the Most High. So these
Right.
are divine.
Right.
Um, and
Bene, Elohim. Yeah.
and in Psalm 86, there was none like you among the gods, O Lord, nor are there any works like yours. So I mean,
Right.
he's getting elevated. He's working his. I've been working my way up the
Right.
pantheon.
and by the way, it's not saying there is no gods besides you, Yahweh. It's saying
Mm,
you're the best. That's not
right.
monotheism. That's monolatry.
Mm,
That's um, everyone else has these gods, but our God's going to kick your God's butt.
right.
That's what they're talking about here, and that's so important that this was a theological concept all the way into the Psalms, right? Which are relatively later texts, some of them. But it's all the way through that it did not go to monotheism very smoothly.
No. Um, and again, in Psalm 89, I like this. This is very, I like this poetry. It's beautiful. But in number 6, for who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? For who among the heavenly beings, again, is like the Lord? But then we have like council of the holy ones. So they
Yeah,
are, they want us to imagine this. They want us to think of a divine council. This is really the
right.
imagery that they are trying to portray. And not saying that having angels there isn't like cool and stuff, but I mean, come on, I think it's even cooler to have a bunch of different gods with different personalities that are
Yeah,
represented by different phenomenons, etc. And we'll get into some of those phenomenon that eventually Yahweh kind of just says yoinks. Oh, and also I wanted to say, take note towards the bottom, 9 and 10. I think we'll bring this up later, but it gives us that imagery that we had spoken of before, like creation of
yeah,
calming the sea or
right.
killing the dragon. I think that's interesting to
Yeah,
note.
absolutely.
So
Okay, we're at
I
Ugarit.
think
Do it.
I think we can. Whew, we're getting
Yeah,
there. I got my
yeah.
shovel out now.
All right.
So
Now we're in Ugarit.
Ugri, why is it so freaking special? Did y'all know that this was found on an accident? A farmer was working on his land and he accidentally uncovered this huge like palace industry complex with a bunch of different buildings, and within this palace specifically they found a bunch of texts, but they found other stuff elsewhere. Now, the texts that they found, a lot of them were broken up, as we'll see later, but some of them in really good condition. And we have some interesting stories about this divine council that was found. When was it? Oh, and I think it was uncovered in the 1950s. So again, somewhere around the 1950s, all of a sudden, it was like senior spring. Everything was coming to life. All the information was coming out.
Right. And Ugarit, like other spots, once you read through it, just like you read Canaanite literature, Egyptian literature, just like last week when we were talking about Atrahasis and Gilgamesh, once you see their libraries and you start to see the parallels to our biblical stories,
Right.
one, the idea that our Bible is, unique or original goes away,
Who
but also
needs
you see um, how the motif adaptation, you'll see very similar stories with different heroes. The Ugaritic had different heroes. The Canaanites had different heroes, and the Egyptians had different heroes. But the motif is the same in terms of their stories. Much cooler than just it dropping out of Sinai in KJV. So yeah,
I mean, it's not so bad, but these
yeah,
texts definitely are worth putting back together to read them. And there was like 1,500 or so.
yeah,
Again, a lot
a
of
lot.
them are not the best condition. So here was just a little
Right.
scotch I pulled out of El. So here are two images of him, and you can see that he's
Cool.
seated, and that's just because he's the father of years, as you can see on the down on the right from one of the Ugaritic myths, which is the Baal cycle I took this from, and the one up top. If you take notice, this is called Shahar and Shalim. El is not just an old man that we think of him. He actually gets a bit excited and has sex with Asherah and possibly something else with a gnat. Not exactly sure what's going
Yeah,
on
man.
there. But hey, even though he might be the kindly old God, he still can get it on. And as well, some of his epithets here: Father of years, El Shaddai, El Elyon, El Olam. Who do we say that? Who's that now? That's
Right.
Yahweh.
Right.
And it's Yahweh assimilating El's position. They're converging together. For whatever reason, there must have been a need to necessitate to come together. Maybe it was something cataclysmic. Maybe it was, I mean, who knows? It was right after the Bronze Age collapse. It just might have been necessary to
Right.
stay alive to do this. So
Right.
yeah, as much as I don't love it, like I get it. I get it.
Yeah. Super cool.
Super cool stuff, right? All right, here's my favorite. So, when I say who's your daddy, usually I like to say it's Baal Hadadi, uh, the storm god of all storm gods. But this is the Baal cycle, one of the Baal cycle tablets. There's 6 of them, I believe, and this dates back to 1500 BCE. This is his epic tale of death and coming back to life. It signifies life cycles, fertility cycles. He controls the rains. He's a really cool dude. He has kids even, which I think is even fascinating. And again, take note that some of his epithets here, well, one specifically, excuse me, ends up being attributed to Yahweh, rider of the clouds. So Yahweh comes, from being this, what I would say is like a small war god likely, and turns into this beast god of everything. He does
Right.
everything now. He
Right.
has all those attributes.
And there are different gods and different views, including warrior gods. So if you look at particular Psalms, you see Psalm 74 is the creation story of the warrior god, very different from a different kind of god who's
Oh,
going to be created in Genesis 1, which is order and speaking. Psalm 74 is breaking the heads of the Leviathan and ripping open the, whatever, like very much warrior gods. And so once you start to get this together, you can piece together the attributes of different kinds of personalities of gods and see how they were all the way, um, all the way
sorry.
sort of pushed together to try to be in one being. And that's where the strict monotheist will tell you that Yahweh or God has so many personality traits. One is slow to anger and one isn't, right?
Oh,
But
yeah,
they
makes
were
sense.
different gods at the time, because gods who are slow to anger are typically not warrior gods who go and destroy things. So when you get all of those personalities pushed together, it doesn't always work, and that's one of the things that
That's why he's such a
people notice.
paradox.
That's right. People notice that, and they say, "Wait a minute, the God in Genesis is very different
Okay.
from the God in Exodus," and blah 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 blah.
That's
Well,
making
sure.
sense though.
Well, sure they are, because they were different gods with different personalities. So
Absolutely. I love, okay. No, I love that. I love how you explained that. That's making it click.
yeah,
Of course,
right.
because he's now filling all these gaps. Like,
That's right.
that's why, in my opinion, monotheism doesn't really work, because you have a God
Correct.
who has to be everything, and it's just as if you can't really do it. even a
Correct.
God. As humans, we
That's
can't do it
why
all, and even as gods, you really can't do it all.
That's right, and that's why the pantheon was so popular, because you had a sun god and a storm god, and then you could blame the sun god if something happened. It's not the storm god's
Right.
fault, and it's not this guy's fault,
Uh,
or whatever it is. But when you push it all together, God is the creator of everything, and then it's all God's fault. And sometimes God has a mental breakdown or changes his personality, and you're like, well, I mean, the God of Job is very different from the God of Deuteronomy. The God of Deuteronomy says, if you're good, I'll reward you. If you're bad, I'll punish you. The God of Job says, screw you, I'll do what I want. And that's a very different God.
Yes, it
so,
is.
you know, so yes,
Make up
no,
your
it doesn't,
mind. Which
monotheism does
personality
not
are you
make sense.
today?
Right,
No, it does
exactly.
not.
Right.
Well, here we can see some of Yahweh's. I pulled up two different ones, two different epithets. Excuse me, one epithet, which is the rider on the clouds, and compared that to some of his scriptures that bring that out, as well as the fact that Yahweh is also seen with having like flashing thunder. Excuse me, flashing lightning, as well as Baal is. And from what I've read, there are some who put forward that it could just be that some of this poetry was actually Baal's poetry, but they just slid Yahweh right in there, and hey, now it makes sense for him. And or these were again stories from Baal that eventually got adopted with Yahweh as he becomes more popular. I mean, if you want a god to be popular, you can't be too rigid. You can't just say like, I mean, if you're, say for instance, I don't know, you've got a bunch of people converging into one place, you might have to like, oh, okay, you know what? We got to keep our God, but we're going to have to add this now because we've got to start filling these gaps. Again, we've got to start making him the popular one. Anyway.
Right. No, and I think, listen, that's a point that shouldn't be understated, is that just like any writing is attempting to make a hero of the story, when you're trying to make your God the hero, you do the same thing as you would, if you're trying to make Abraham look good or Moses look good, great. But if you're trying to make Yahweh look good, or El look good, or El Shaddod, or El Shaddai, or whatever it is, then you're going to see these, history written by the victor, my hero story, because that's how it was. It was your God was your hero story. You had a hero story for your God, around the campfire. And so keep in mind that, nothing's written in a vacuum. People had their own agendas that they wanted people to read about how their God was the best and all that sort of stuff. So it's the same conversation. It's just about, instead of from people, we're talking about the members of the pantheon.
Right. And again, like how do you keep your God spiffy and on top and like the best of the best? Well, you kind of make him do the things that you would expect a powerful God to do, and he cuts up Rahab in Isaiah 51. So again, he's being like Marduk, and he's killing Tiamat, the water dragon. Same thing in 74, either
Yeah,
Leviathan or
exactly. Yep.
these are all just representations of Yahweh controlling the waters, chaos.
Right.
He's the
And
dude.
very, very different from separating the water from the Shemaim and the whatever. This is, you
Not
broke
as
the heads of
peaceful.
the dragon in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan.
Right.
You divided the sea. Imagine this, giant God with a like a big bat, like a wooden, club, like
Mm,
spreading out the water. It's not the whole peaceful Genesis one, like we're just going to do that or whatever it is. The warrior God that you see in Isaiah also is a scary dude, and he's
right.
supposed to be. So
Yeah.
cool.
It is very cool. And what I also think is interesting too in Isaiah 25 up here, Yahweh is the one who is seen as swallowing up death. And that's not
Mhm.
necessarily something that is done in this pantheon. But But I will add to that, there is an alternative ending to the ball cycle that was found in Ugarit, where a gnat is someone who does destroy death, which is unheard of. A gnat is the warrior goddess huntress. But anyway, I just thought I would add that little twist to it. But normally, death is the one who swallows you, as you see in the ball cycle here.
Right.
Mott's kind of teasing Baal Hadad and saying, like, you got to come down my throat. And even at the
Right.
end, he's like, I like to eat clay. Like, this is what I
Right.
do. I devour the clay. He's death. And, you know, Baal goes down into Mott's belly, and then the sun continues to shine, drought comes. So this is the fertility cycle, you know, when he goes down for the old dirt nap. But I think that's pretty powerful that Yahweh is supposed to be the one who does the swallowing of death now. That's pretty
Super
epic.
cool.
Yeah, it's super
Super
cool.
cool.
He doesn't have to have a
Yeah.
fight with them per se. You just
He's
say
just
he's
more
swallowed.
powerful or whatever
He's
it is.
just more
And talk
right.
about that. Talk about power. I mean, from Psalm 82, he said, I'm gonna be here. You guys are dying, but not me. And so
Right.
here it's his gaining his immortality. You know, and in regular sort of Western religion, you just assume that God is immortal, but that's not how that works. In ancient Near East, it has to be explained because death is a real thing. Like, and gods used to die, and so the change from a god that used to die to an immortal god didn't happen overnight. You had to write something and say this is what's going to happen, and here's why he's immortal, but the other, right? It's not just something you just accept. And so here are some great examples of Yahweh gaining strength, Yahweh beating death, all that sort of stuff. And so now Yahweh becomes immortal, and that's brand new in terms of the pantheon ideas of God. That's a new idea. So super cool. Yeah.
It is. And I wanted also to take note that it mentions on the top right there, Leviathan. I have that circled because it's mentioning, like, even though Baal was the one at the time who destroyed the sea dragon, because that's what Baal did, because he was the most powerful at the time. But again, now we see Yahweh is the one he's the one doing that job. All right, I'm going to keep on pressing on. Now, this I thought would be an interesting little whammy jammy to throw into here. This one's a little more difficult, but I will say if you want more information, you should absolutely either read William Deaver's book, Did God Have a Wife? Or look up some of his videos on YouTube. He's excellent at explaining. I mean, not that you can't, sorry, but I just love William Deaver.
There's lots of scholars out there that you could recommend are fantastic.
Yeah.
You're not gonna, yeah. There's some great people out there.
I think his is just so easy to find. Like the minute I search for his was a bit more popular. Everybody else is sometimes it gets obscure and hard to find. His is pretty easy. So anyhow, I thought this would be an interesting show to say, like, okay, is it possible that we can still find some of these Bene Elohim by name? Well, not necessarily, but almost sort of kind of, I'll say. So, first, I wanted to show you this really cool depiction of Kadeshet, or Kadesh, excuse me, which is, again, kind of another version of Asherah, standing next to Min on her left. And yes, that is his phallus there. He is a fertility
He's
god.
To go. Yeah.
He's revving to go. But also, this is Rashef to on our right, excuse me, her left, our right. Again, we see her perched on top of a lion. She is called Lion Lady. She has the Hathor wig. She's got the moon above her. And even if you kind of take a little teensy little peek, you can see the snake just above her head, because that is part of her hieroglyph for her name. Anywho, so Habakkuk 3, interestingly enough, has some interesting imagery possibly of Yahweh in this theophany coming down from a mountain as did these other gods in the Canaanite pantheon, as I have here on the right. And, his cohorts work with him and they do things together. Well, this um, scripture here in Habakkuk 3, verses 5, it mentions before him went pestilence and plague followed close behind. Well, if you look at the Hebrew, and I apologize that I don't have the Hebrew here in front of us, but pestilence is deber and plague is resheph. And these are two gods, as I just said. You can see resheph here. Deber, I don't know much about deber, scant information. I trust the scholars. If they say that was a god, that was a god. Now, okay, that could just be whatever. But then when you go down to verse 8, and it says, was your wrath against the rivers, O Lord? Was your anger against the rivers, or your rage against the sea? Well, interestingly enough, we see again that imagery of Yahweh ripping off the head of Rahab, which again harkens us back to this repeated motif throughout history, where the mightiest God is the one who destroys that serpent, that slippery serpent. And even just the way that it has rivers and sea, Nahar and Yam, is so cool, because that's the same way that it's spoken in the Ugaritic literature. It's Yam, Nahar. And I guess because that's poetry, that's how, they do it. They do the names like that. But it's really cool how some of these gods have so many daggone names. There's so many epithets. It at times makes it confusing. The more I read it, the more I'm starting to get it. But I do feel like I see God coming down the mountain with his brothers at his side, ready to tear into that watery salt dragon. What do you say? Tell me, Rabbi, what you got? What you thinking?
I will tell you that Habakkuk is a crazy book. It's short,
Isn't it?
but it is full of crazy imagery, clearly influenced from these sort of Near Eastern ideas. It talks about people ascribe to their God, but you, Yahweh, are everlasting, meaning my holy God, you never die, right? Meaning the other gods did, but you're immortal, right? Remember that story? Yahweh, you've made them a subject of contention. El Shaddai, you've made them a cause of complaint, right? The God of hosts are armies. So there's armies behind him, right? All of these other ideas that it's not just, your gods don't have anger against rivers and seas. Gods have anger against the river god and the sea god of Nahar and Yam, right? No one gets angry at a river, but they're not talking about that. They're talking because everything had a boss to it, right? Yam and Nahar were proper nouns, and so yes, we've seen Yahweh get angry with the other gods lots of times,
Right.
and
trends.
wreak havoc, right? And wreak havoc on them, right? And crush heads and tell them they're going to die,
Right.
And so we're seeing, you have to read this. This is something you have to read with the Ugaritic thing next to it. Otherwise, it makes no sense. Like, this is one of those things where, like, the rabbis are like, I don't know. The commentary on this is, absurd, but the scholarship makes sense that you are pointing out. This is, listen to those words. The eternal mountains were shattered along his ancient pathways. This is such cool poetry, right?
It is.
It is so cool,
it.
right? You brandished your naked bow, sated with the arrows. This is a warrior god who just wiped out stuff out of anger and spite, and it's just like such a different world that you get a little glimpse into, and that to me is the aha moments of joy and being like, oh, I want the whole story, like I want more, all the stuff we've lost. But what an awesome book that would be, of all these um, all these tales, but the way they were told originally, before the redactors and the monotheists got a hold of them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm so thankful that we've had these discoveries, because they've really brought to light so much information. Now, here's the portion of the show where it gets a little wobbly, but that's okay because we're going to move kind of quickly through these, because you mentioned something that I kind of would like to come back to. This I wanted to show because I think this happens somewhere around possibly Josiah's reforms, where here we see a standing stone, the larger stone of Yahweh, a smaller standing stone on the right of our screen representing Asherah. And then even in the forefront towards us, we see altars where they would put their offering. And on Asherah's, on the little smaller altar, they found, I think mentioned this before, they found residue of cannabis. So, hello, lady.
Hey, yo.
So yeah, oh yeah, no, Yahweh having a wife, impossible. Yeah, right. Suck it. You just stop that now. Here, okay, moving along. And another little inscription that I love. This is from somewhere around the 7th century BCE. Blessed be Iriyahu by Yahweh and by his Asherah. So there's got to be this idea of Yahweh as he's assimilating or ascending to El's position. Of course, he's gonna take what's his. He's gonna take his wife. He's gonna take those sons. That's all his now. And if he was too rigid and said like, "Oh no, I don't want all that," I don't know. Would Yahweh have survived? Maybe not. This might have been a necessity that he take all these things at whatever time that this syncretization was happening. I can't say, but it's pretty obvious that there are people who had an idea that Yahweh had a wife. Anywho, we're going to keep on pressing. Did you have anything to add?
No, you're good. We got a little bit more time. Get done. We need to get done. You're good.
Okay. Oh, also, excuse me, take note. I love the fact that Holy One isn't anything special. Not to say you're not special, Asherah. I take that back. But Holy One is something, I just kind of thought that was something that was for Yahweh. But nope, Nope. Not only was it El, they called El Holy One, but Asherah, she had 70 sons, and everything I highlighted here, that's all Asherah from the Baal cycle. And I'm going to go to the next one because we talked last week just about numbers, and sometimes numbers are just numbers. And I'm thinking here with the symbolism of 70, I think there was probably more than 70 gods in this pantheon. But 70 probably just means, that it's complete perfection, whatever that number meant back then.
Right. Some sort of
and that there was
holiness
a
around
lot.
7. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Just like, with the scriptures that I have here to the left, there's probably not 70 of anything of tribes or whatnot.
Correct.
It just was to me, there's very
It's
diverse.
just a holy amount of
Yeah.
people. Right. Of things.
And I'm so, because I probably would have spent a lot of time before on that. And I just love the fact that it's just that simple.
It's just that simple. Yeah.
It's really just that simple.
It's idiomatic.
Sometimes. Yeah.
I mean, you just have to know what they meant.
Right.
And don't go crazy trying to like interpret it in 2023 and saying it must have been this, whatever it is, because they'd be laughing at you. They'd be laughing at you. You'd be like, what do you mean? Everybody here knows what 70 means. It means a lot, but a holiness to it, because 7 and whatever it is, and you'd be like, how do you not know that? And we were like, well, sorry, it's been 4,000 years. We apologize.
Kind of got lost in translation.
Yeah, it did.
Okay. And also again, 70 sons of Atharat. That's Asherah.
Right.
Oh, I thought I would throw this little wrench in, see what you thought about it. Francesca Stavrokopoulou, as well as other people, have put forward that there's a possibility in Deuteronomy 33 that it could have been Asherah coming down with Yahweh. Again, another theophany, Yahweh coming down with his boom boom. He making that boom boom. He's a badass.
Heck
But
yeah. Heck
I'm
yeah.
sorry. I apologize, y'all. I'm kind of saying things without realizing I'm not explaining
No, but
myself.
here's the thing. We have an hour, and so some of the stuff we can explain, and some of the stuff you're just gonna have to we're just go take a look at. We're gonna see, throw those big terms and things at you, and that's okay. To be able to say, wait a minute, what did that mean? And it's not like you're not expected to have common understanding of a lot of this stuff. You have to dive into it and then understand it, and that's okay. We all started somewhere,
Yeah, yes. And sometimes I forget what I know because I think I don't know
right?
much of anything. And yesterday I was talking to my husband. He was like, "What's cuneiform?" I was like, "Oh,
Right.
you don't know what cuneiform?" I honestly
These
was
aren't
shook
like
because
common things.
but
Yeah.
he's so smart. I was like, I know something my husband don't know. Oh, a cuneiform. Okay, let me tell
Let me
you, it's
tell
a
you,
real. It was the kind of
this
rain.
is a very narrow market that we are in. Okay. Like, this is a very narrow market in terms of the things that we're talking about here. Not a lot of people know about it, even very smart people. So,
Yeah. But you guys actually in the description I have the information for what I recommend is a really good paper so you can read for yourself the possibility that Asherah her name was actually in some of these holy scriptures. What of course she would have been like way back in the way back before, you know, the redactors or whatnot happened. So is there a possibility her name was there, Asherah, instead of Fiery Law? Who knows? You take a look and you tell me what you think. I'd love to know. This is the one I just quickly wanted to discuss before we go. I loved how you brought up like the imagery of Yahweh and like his lust for war. And similarly, Anat and Astarte, Ishtar, whatever you want to call her, these again are the two war goddesses, huntress. Sometimes they worked in tandem in the Ugaritic literature. Um, but what I thought was interesting that Anat doesn't appear really anywhere in the Bible except for like Bethanat, I think possibly, which is location. And then we have this in verse 6, Shamgar, son of Anat. So it does make me wonder if there was a time, because we have a theophoric name of Anat, if and this is an older song, which it would be typical of having more gods mentioned, if this
right.
was not a time when, again, Yahweh was working with, who knows, maybe it was Yahweh in Anat
Right.
chopping people up at one time. Could be.
Right.
No.
Could
It's
be.
interesting to think about.
And if you ever want to see little pieces of what was, look in the songs, look in the inset poems, the Song of Deborah, the Song of the Sea. Those poetry are older than the text surrounding it, meaning that the poetry inspired the prose around it. The poetry came first
Mm.
and then inspired the prose around it, meaning this was a song that they knew, which they must have known something about Shamgar and Anat, but that did not become relevant in the Devorah story, because the person who was writing the story was like, "Well, we don't need to talk about that."
Hmm.
But the songs like this, like in the Song of the Sea, talk about all kinds of crazy stuff that the prose has nothing to do with, and that's because this is where they build those stories out of, because this is how they used to communicate.
I love it. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for how you explain that to me because a lot of times I'm still just, again, trying to piece it together, but you just
sure,
make it make sense for me. And I do
my
appreciate that.
pleasure. That's
I
my job.
think I think that I'm really pretty much done here.
Cool.
Yeah, I just wanted to show everybody this. This is a Hurry and hymn that was found in Ugarit. There's actually music to it. They don't know how the music actually goes. So somebody had to kind of figure that out, but it sounds beautiful. You can look it up online and listen to it. It's beautiful. There was so much that was found there in Ugari. I think it's worth, y'all taking a look at. Anyhow, we're going to take that out. We're going to do that. I would like to thank you so much for you just helping me get through that and help some of those things sink in a little bit, just understanding those tools. That's really helpful. I do appreciate that. And I also want to
No
thank
problem.
our friends for coming in and
Yeah.
joining us too.
Joshua, welcome. This is you've got a lot to listen to.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
Joshua.
none of that's true. Yeah, all right.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of killing.
Yeah, okay, welcome. So
welcome, Joshua.
Welcome.
You're welcome here.
Do us a favor, and if you've got questions, that's great. But we'll cease the proselytization. But in any case, thank you all for listening.
Yes.
Next week we'll be back here, same bad time, same bad channel, and we look forward to seeing all of you most then. So, Ryan, thank you for bringing all that stuff, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us here at the Adults Table. And just FYI, over on Captain Dadpool's channel, I'm going to head over there now. Dr. Kip Davis is talking about a new scroll that was uncovered of some sorts. I think it's like a New Testament scroll. I don't freaking know. Some crazy thing. Anyhow, I'm going to go take a look. Y'all should too. You have a good night. Thank you. Love you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.